Well, good morning. This is our presentation on shifting phrases and paragraphs and sentences on the SAT and the ACT. I'm not sure if any of you will ever see this video because we're going to cover this in class. But in case you're home today, for whatever reason, and you need to follow along with me, here's my presentation. So I might be talking to an absolutely no one, but let's go with it anyway. So what I want to do today is I want to go through some notes briefly, not much, and then we're going to practice something and then come back and actually go further in depth with it. So on the SAT and also on the ACT, you have to understand English grammar. All right, so that's something we've been focusing a lot on in our class. That's why they call it, once again, a language test. At the same time, they also are going to ask you a lot of questions about what makes effective writing, and that's why they also refer to it as the writing test, and therefore it's the writing and language test. So we're going to focus on some writing skills that are going to be tested on the SAT and the ACT. So the most common writing questions they ask us are about how we should shift a phrase or a sentence or a paragraph in certain passages that we read. And so there's a pretty simple, easy rule of thumb that I want you to remember. All right, so here we go. So your rule of thumb is this, which says on your worksheet that when the SAT or the SAT asks you if you'd like to move a phrase or would you like to move a sentence or would you like to move a paragraph, you should probably move it. All right, so that's why we call the whole piece, I like to move it, move it. All right, so here's our point. Occasionally, yes, there will be a rare question where you're not going to move the phrase, you're not going to move the sentence, or you're not going to move the paragraph. But it's so rare in my study of the SAT that this rule is basically going to lead you about 99% of the way. Like it's 99% spot on that you're going to move something. So what I want to do before I actually get into the actual rules, I want to see what you can do first on your own. So I'm going to pause your video. I want you to try the activity all about the royal prankster and then answer the 5 questions. And then we're going to come back and go through the answers together and talk about how we can find the right answer. So pause your video and then restart it after you answer your 5th question. Okay. So you're back because you've finished reading about the royal prankster and you're ready to go through some notes. All right, so here we go. So we're talking about moving phrases, some notes that you have. I know my photocopying is real bad on this worksheet. I apologize. So it says, what is the phrase next to currently? So when I talk about moving a phrase, what's it next to currently? Something else to consider is what's the phrase modifying currently? So what's it currently modifying? It's typically the noun that's right before it, unless it's at the very beginning of the sentence, and then that phrase is actually describing the subject. So really, what word is it around is what we have to really think about. And lastly, look at the given options in the answers and decide which word the phrase should modify then. Like what word should it be around? And therefore move the phrase around a little bit with each of the choices if you can't see it immediately. So let's take a look at number 1 and number 4 in our passage about the silly emperor to see if we can figure out how this actually works. So here's number 1, moving a phrase. So it says, so if we see how the line which says, with piqued curiosity and a touch of boredom, and it follows the pronoun one, which basically means phone or telephone. So the question is like, wait a minute, so the telephone had piqued interest in a touch of boredom? That doesn't make any sense at all. So we have to figure like, okay, then who was piqued with curiosity? Who had a touch of boredom? So if you look at the other answers that we have, it makes sense that I want to put it next to the actual emperor, which I'm going to pronounce him as Pui. I'm not sure if that's right or not, but we'll just say with piqued curiosity and a touch of boredom, Pui is how we would write this sentence. So think about maybe moving it to the front of the sentence would make a lot of sense. So B is our answer. All right, pretty easy stuff. Let's take a look at number 4. On number 4, they're asking us about moving, once again, the phrase since he was a young child. All right, so right now, it's right after the infinitive, which is to stop him since he was a young child. So it's kind of weird because you're like, wait a minute. So they tried to stop him since he was a young child? Like, how long has he wanted a phone? They've been trying to stop him ever since he was a young child. So if you think about it, what are your other options that we have on number 4? And so it says, well, since he was a young child in his autobiography, they were afraid of what would happen since he was a young child, or he had been confined to the palace since he was a young child. And even when you bounce around, you're like, oh, I can hear it. Oftentimes you can hear the answer if you just kind of bounce it around a little bit. You're like, that makes a lot more sense. Like he needs to be confined to the palace since he was a young child, or has been confined since he was a young child. Second thing we're going to look at is actually how we move sentences around. So back to that front page, some notes about this. So when they ask us to move an entire sentence, think about how it begins. Is there a transitional word in that sentence? So think about maybe how that transition connects to the previous sentence. Something else to think about is maybe how does a sentence end? So think about how it begins and now think about how the sentence ends. And think about how it ends and how's that going to lead on to the very next sentence as you're kind of figuring out where you want to put it. Another question is, like, is it in a particular form? I'm going to sneeze. God bless me. Sorry, everyone. So is the sentence you're going to move a question? And if it's a question, does it need to sit in front of its answer? Or if it's an answer, does it need to follow the question that's in the passage? So think about what form what they're asking you to move is in. And lastly, then look at your given options and just simply decide how the paragraph's flowing. And those are all reasons and concepts to think about when you're actually moving a sentence within a paragraph. So let's take a look at sentence number two, or question number two, rather. So in question number two, they're asking us about moving this sentence. And sentence actually starts off with the word however. So we got to figure out, okay, where am I going to put the word however? Because the sentence states that the advisors should not have worried much. So the however must have followed a statement that implies that there was much to worry about initially. So because the sentence is saying, yeah, but however, they shouldn't have worried too much. So what was the worry first to lead into this word however? And that's how you get this one right. So think about your choices. So Pui was just a teenage boy trying to have fun. However, his advisors should not have worried much. However, his advisors should not have worried much at the age of 15 years. Pui was just a teenage boy trying to have fun. He used his new phone to make prank calls to locals in Beijing. However, his advisors should not have worried much. And Pui would ring them and then just giggle, quickly hanging up. However, his advisors should not have worried much. Well, if you think about it, choices A, C, and D don't exactly follow a statement that's so troubling that would lead logically to the advisors worrying. None of those actually are leading into it. But B seems to work. Now, there's no need to worry. Why? Because he was just a teenager who was trying to have fun. And so therefore, the B choice makes a lot of sense. So think about that B choice. So right now, where it's placed, where it says at the very beginning of the paragraph, at 15 years of age, Pui was just a teenage boy trying to have fun. However, his advisor should not have worried much. Doesn't make a lot of sense. So I know A seems very tempting, but B makes a lot of sense. Think about if I go with the B choice. If I go with that B choice and put it right before sentence one, now you're kind of carrying over from the previous sort of thought. You're like saying, however, his advisor shouldn't have worried much. At age 15, he was just trying to have fun. And I can hear that the B choice makes a lot more sense. We're sort of easing into this paragraph with that word however. That's a tough one. All right. Next thing is when we talk about moving paragraphs and what happens when we move paragraphs. So think about the paragraph's topic sentence and where it would fit best. So the paragraph's clincher sentence. Maybe it's how the paragraph ends, and therefore what paragraph does it best lead into? And then think about what type of paragraph it is. Is it an introduction paragraph? Is it a good conclusion paragraph? They're pretty easy to spot. Oftentimes the SAT won't choose those. They will, but they oftentimes will choose more of the body paragraph to see if you can kind of figure out where they want to flow. So let's take a look at number 5 as an example. 5 says, if you remember that we've changed paragraph 2, right? It's critical. If we change paragraph 2, now it begins with, however, his advisors should not have worried much. And then it goes on to describe his harmless pranks. All right, so I want to think about that. So think about how the other paragraphs actually have a certain focus. Paragraph 1 is about how Pui wants a phone, but it goes against tradition. Now, paragraph 3 talks about the traditions were to be followed even if he had lost his title. Paragraph 4 says that while his title was still kept him secluded, his advisors were still very protective. And you're thinking, wait a minute, paragraph 1 flows really well into paragraph 3. He wants a phone, but it goes against traditions. Paragraph 3, traditions were to be followed. 1 and 3 should probably touch each other. And 3 actually goes right into 4. Like, even if he lost his title, he had to follow traditions. And then it says, while his title still kept him secluded, his advisors still were very protective of him. So therefore, paragraph 2 really makes sense to go after paragraph 4. Think about the point of paragraph 2 now, which is there's no reason to fear his pranks, though. So he wants a phone. It goes against traditions. Traditions were to be followed, even though he'd lost his title. While his title still kept him secluded, his advisors were very protective. However, they shouldn't have been worried too much because these are just harmless pranks. And we realize, oh, paragraph 2 fits really well at the very, very end. All right, so make sure you circle D for number 5. Let's put it at the very end. And lastly, keep and delete questions. So a keep delete question, there's no real pattern to these. Sometimes you keep it, sometimes you delete it. So no real tricks that way. So my trick is always simply to go ahead and just simply write on your test, whether it's the SAT or the ACT, just simply physically scratch out the phrase they want you to delete and then reread the sentence and say, okay, if I didn't delete it, how's it sound? Does it make sense, or is it kind of confusing now that I've cut it out? And then think in your head, what's the reason that you would keep it or the reason you would delete it? And so tell yourself why before you actually look at their answers, because their answers can sometimes be very like a trap. I can kind of set a little trap for you, like, oh, I really like that answer. Think about first why you would keep or delete it. All right, so let's take a look at number 3, last one. So number 3, we're asked about like cutting out part of this paragraph. So let's take a look at that paragraph and let's cut out the part they're saying, hey, we're thinking about deleting this. What do you think? So now we're left with the title of emperor in China came with many traditions and cultural aspects that had to be followed. In fact, he was to be seen more like a god to his people. Historians tend to class different periods of Chinese history into dynasties, which means the title of emperor stayed within the same family. Hui actually lost his title in 1912 when the empire was abolished. Well, you don't really lose anything by deleting it. You don't really gain anything by keeping it. And so if I don't really gain anything by keeping it, I'm not losing anything by deleting it, that's pretty much a no-brainer. We should probably get rid of it. And more important are sort of how the emperor was seen as a god, explaining why he was so secluded from the outside, and also how his title was lost, leading to why the rules were relaxed for Hui. Right? Those are all things that are really more important. And therefore, the part that we are cutting out really doesn't seem to be all that important at all. Right? And for that reason, I'm okay cutting that guy out. Let's delete him. But before we delete it, let's talk about why. And once again, the reason of why is it's not really contributing anything to the passage at all. So the two choices we have are deleted because the fact is not necessary to the passage as a whole, or it's deleted because an emperor was still a man, not a god. Well, yeah, true, D is right. I mean, but it's not really the reason why I'm cutting it. And so think about that. D is tempting. But it's not really the real reason why I'm cutting it out as a writing piece. It's just simply that it doesn't fit. All right, so make sure you choose C, not D. D is very tempting, but it is not the answer. That's all. All right, so I'm going to give you one more practice passage about John Quincy Adams and the Moonies, and to see if you can apply the same rules to that. Thanks, everybody.